Nothing's coming through. The voice stopped.
Now it's working. I just heard Svi. Can you talk, Rabbi?
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Now we can hear you. We couldn't hear you for a while.
Oh, I said good morning. Ayin Beis, volume 3. We're on top of page 1289. And what I'm going to do is review what we learned on Friday, especially the end section of the paragraph, the bottom of 1288 and top of 1289, because I went through a little quicker than usual. So just to keep remember the new flow, or the flow of the new ideas, going back to the themes discussed back on page 1210 about Havaya Yechatu Meriva, that the enemies of God, the opponents of God, will be vanquished, will be eliminated. And I explained the connection because he's going to go into the whole area of the darkest areas of life, which is the suffering that we endure, and ultimately understand how that too will be transformed. Because remember, the key word was transformation, not just draw divine energy into existence, but to transform the very keli, the containers, the night, the darkness, the tzimtzum, the reshimu, and reveal in it the helam ha'atzmi, the divine essential levels that are completely beyond revelation altogether. Like we learned at the top of page 1287, that even the transgressions, zdeinis, through tshuva ma'ava, are transformed into merits. Because it comes from that helam ha'atzmi, that level of tshuva, as we discussed at length. So that's the connection as we'll see it emerge in the coming pages. So he went back, we reviewed the questions. What exactly are we talking about here? So we know that we're talking about a high level of opponent, and he explained, how could something oppose God? Mi yamid negde, who could stand up against it? Who could oppose God? So he brought the pasuk from the beginning of Job, of Eoiv, we're talking Rosh Hashanah, the prosecuting forces and angels challenging the compassion of God, because Havaya is compassion. It's the din, the Gevuros, the severities, the judgments now these are judgments of Kedusha. They are protecting, like he said, like a child protects the honor of his father. So he's medagdik, and he's being very accountable over anyone that is not lacking avodah. And you don't see the hamshacha that comes through mitzvahs when a person transgresses. So these so-called forces are standing up and challenging the compassion of God. There's no room for compassion here. These people need to be judged. So it's coming from a Kedusha place. But because it's too meticulous, from Gevuros of Kedusha can come the Gevuros koshes of the Satan, the very harsh judgments and severities that are not necessarily Kedusha and holy. Like he said on top of page 1288. So when once you start digging, it's like you hear sometimes, even in surgery, a doctor or a dentist will say, I don't think we should go all the way to with surgery all the way in, because once you go in, who knows what happens? Even though the infection may have gone deeper in, but sometimes let's deal with less surface levels, because once you dig too deep, it can cause other problems. The whole building can crumble. Like you remember, God forbid, Surfside. They couldn't recover them because once you go dig deeper, then other things happen. Just giving examples that even though initially it's coming from good intentions, but when you start digging, there can be suddenly a yanika that suddenly now come the real negative forces. And so it's like somebody who gets up and says, what do we say? The Rebbe would be very adamant when he hears somebody spoke against Jews. Even if a Jew did something wrong, the Rebbe was always the expression, al tiftach peh, you don't have to start talking about it publicly, especially in the month of Elul. Now you could say, why not? We're all one family, and someone did something wrong. I want to rebuke them. The answer is, besides the fact who appointed you to be the rebuker and the judge, that's another question, like we'll soon discuss the different type of personalities. But there's another thing. You may have good intentions, but someone else hears it and says, oh, that guy is this. The Satan hears it and then suddenly says, these people, they deserve much worse. In other words, basically, you're opening up the whole Pandora's box, if you wish. Now, not because you want to cover up. It's not a cover up. It's just that's important to know when you have judgment to be careful of how much. So he basically says, the Nachash. And that's why he's saying Rosh Hashanah in the Haftarah, Hashem Yechatu Medivav, that they will eliminate these opponents, these enemies, who challenge the compassion, because through Shofar, we awaken, like he said, the Moichin, which were nostalgic, which were receded and allowed for the more comatose state of emotions where their Gvura can become stronger. And through Shofar, you reawaken. And therefore, the compassion is there, and you sweeten the Gevuros. So it's not like you ignore. Rosh Hashanah is still a Yom Adin. It's called a day of judgment. But instead of listening and so-called what's the word, accepting the judgments, you actually sweeten them. You transform them. Now, the next paragraph on page 1288. He said, let's first understand these Gevuros Kashis. What are they exactly? These severe, these harsh judgments, and how they actually emerge from Gevuros the Kedusha. So he brought, and I'm just going to sum this up because it's worth the Zohar. And I will say, I did look up the sources, that this next piece, is actually taken from Biyuri HaZohar, from the Mittler Rebbe. And it's almost, I can't say word for word, but even the description of the personalities that we're going to talk about, the people who have a bad personality, a cruel personality and character type, he also talks about in Biyuri HaZohar. So some of these very strong language that we learn is word for word from there. Maybe if we have time, we can learn that as well, but it's there, clearly there. I can tell you what page. It's Kuf Mem Daled in Biyuri HaZohar, Emor, where he discusses it. And there's also a mimer of the Mittler Rebbe on this topic. Now remember, Biyuri HaZohar is the Alter Rebbe's Maimorim, but it's Mittler Rebbe's Hanochas. He wrote them. And you want to have the sources, yes, but it's Kuf Mem Daled, 140.
What was the parsha?
Page 4, Maimori Admor Amtsoi. The Mittler Rebbe's Maimorim is Bamidbar, volume 2, page 766 and on. Yeah. You could listen. Yeah, good. Okay.
Kuf Mem Daled.
Kuf Mem Amud Daled. Or Kuf Mem D. 140D. Okay. Now, so what he brings there is like this. The Zohar, that the head of Esav, Ba'atvi di Yitzchak, is in the bosom of Isaac, of Yitzchak. Now, what does this mean? Esav is Gevuros Kashes, is harsh judgments. Esav is Gevura. Like he says afterwards, Al Charbecha Tichya. He lived his life, his very sustenance is on a sword that draws blood. So it doesn't get harsher than that. He's basically a murder. He lives on murder. He lives on killing. Where's that rooted, that type of Gvura? So it's rooted in the Chitzenius, the Pselis of Pselis, the waste of the waste, the outer of Yitzchak, who's also Gvura. But Yitzchak is Gvura of Gedusha, Pachad Yitzchak, reverence of God. But ultimately that can evolve into an Esav. We're going to learn more how that happens. But that's the statement. And he says to understand this above, let's understand it below. That there are types of human beings, and he gave 3 categories of people who are sheyesh b'hem ra gomer. They have within them and their personality. He doesn't say they are ultimate evil. They have within them ra gomer, a total evil, a complete type of evil, completed. Like murder and literally like aggressive, violent predators, animals. It's called an ein schlechter Mensch, a bad person, a cruel person. who tortures others, even people he loves and even his family. So even though he loves them and enjoys them, rejoices with them, nevertheless, he also tortures them as much as he can, because that's his life. Like with Esau, that's his life. He gets life from that. He feels sustained, like he mentions later, like a leech. He feeds off someone else's blood. And the fact that he doesn't rejoice in them, he says that's a selfish thing. That's because he happens to like it. So it's good for him. But it's not that because he wants good for them. And just like a good person, rejoices and gets sustenance and life from helping another, the exact opposite is in this Ishra Hara Be'etzem. It's interesting. First, he did say, Sheyesh behem ra gomer, and later he does says, Ish hara be'etzem. He makes it much worse that he's fundamentally a cruel person. Before he says he has real cruelty in him. Just pointing it out. And this goes to such an extent, he says, the kol kach higia davar of this cruelty in his soul, in his spirit, that when another person fails or falls and falters and gets hurt, he has chayas from it. He actually enjoys it. Sameach mesanig ma'id, as if he won a treasure. Even if he doesn't hate that person, it's only due to the fact that he just has this cruel side to him, that he enjoys the faltering or the failure of another. And the same as the opposite. When the other person succeeds or grows, let's say in wealth or kavod or hatzlacha and bracha in his endeavors, or in the life of his children, someone has pleasure, something positive, it bothers him. It hurts him. Er vergeht nicht. He can't stand it. He can't stand another person's gain, even if he doesn't lose anything from it. And all this beside etzem teva harasha by, due to this very deep cruel, this fundamental cruel side within him. And then he says there are many levels of this, God forbid, deeper and deeper. And then he goes upward. Then there's something a little less subtle, a little more subtle, not as blatantly, but also not so great. And that is a person who gets excited when he hears that another person has sinned, and he very much desires that he should be punished. And he also offers himself to be a shliach, to be the one that actually causes the person to bring judgment on that person. And even though he dresses it up in a garment, in the Beir Azeri, he elaborates even more that he dresses it up in garment, that it's not about me, it's about that person did something wrong and he deserves punishment. The Kol Mokim, it's his achzarius, it's his cruelty that is being driven, that drives this, not his dedication to God suddenly. And that's why he gets more excited about it than another person. And v'lo mitzad yiras shamayim, not due to yiras shamayim, his fear or his reverence of heaven, of God. And he convinced himself, and how do we know this? Because we see people that are more God-fearing and more complete than him, and they're not so immersed and so invested in this judgment.
Much more, the Rabbi said.
Terrible. Excuse me?
The Rabbi said they are much more Yerei Muslimim than him. How
I
they
said that. I'm reading
not
that.
only more.
I
How
just
they
said that.
Okay.
Okay. Then there's another level that's even more subtle. Now, why is this more subtle than the first level? Because the first level, the person is pushing going, he's not even waiting for someone to do something wrong. It's even someone he just is torturing people. He likes to torture. He's a sadist. This level is his sadism comes out when there's some excuse he finds, and he suddenly lines up. Then there's a third level. He says, Yesh oid, ra dak mizeh. And this is more subtle because this is more about the actual inner personality. that in general, his mind and his heart is inclined to always be judgmental. He's always seeing the negative in people and doesn't see the good in them at all. And is always judging people as guilty. Always not to merit, but to the opposite. And here, I said it on Friday, I corrected myself. This is what he means. What he means here, Pnimius Yeser, means it's not as blatant as the first two. The first two, it's clear the guy's torturing people. The second one, the person, as soon as someone makes a transgression and he's ready, he's using his cruelty to be the punisher, to be the avenger. Here, it's just a personality type. It's more internal. It's a person who looks at people in a negative way. And that's why he says, and that's the root. Because obviously, if he didn't look negatively at anyone, he wouldn't be a sadist. And he wouldn't be a punisher. But it could also have only level 3, and it didn't express itself yet in level 1 and 2, or 2 and 1. That's how, when you read it again, you see that's what he means. So the subtler form is still something really bad. It means he sees people negatively. He may not act on it. He doesn't say these words. I'm just saying them. I'm spelling them out. So he says, but that's the root of the Ra. What you're seeing from this is that the levels, actually one evolves from the next in a way. It all begins with something inside of you, inside of this person, that is cruel. And it could be he has a negative eye. And then the question is how far it manifests itself in the Gevuros Koshes. And then he says, I'm reading now at the bottom, I'm summing up the bottom of page 1288. Remember, all this is an example from human beings to understand above. And he says like this, we'll understand from this, the Gevuros Koshes, the harsh judgments above. What are they? They're called Shluchei Hadin. So let me elaborate a little more than I did on Friday. In Ein Sof Lifnei Tzimtzum, let's make this very clear, loud and clear. In Ein Sof Lifnei Tzimtzum, there is no din altogether. Meaning, in the way we're talking now, everything is godly energy, divine energy, seamless divine energy. Does God have the power to reveal and to conceal? Yes, we know that. Does God have the power of revelation of Oyer and the power of Tzimtzum? But there, it's all completely godly forces. The whole idea, the concept that there can even be, I'm not even getting to these harsh levels, even on a most subtle level, a discipline is only after the Tzimtzum. The Tzimtzum what's the word I want to use? The Tzimtzum actualized and personified God's power to conceal. On its own, it's a divine power, as we're going to be learning, and we have learned, that's completely as divine as God's power to reveal. Remember that, critical to remember that. It's only down below when it comes into our perspective where you can see that it could be the difference between a Holocaust and redemption. But from the perspective of the Eibishter, Tzimtzum is the power of divine, just as it is the power, is the power of Gili. Now, once there's Tzimtzum, however, there are consequences that you don't have from Gili. When the light is shining, the divine light is shining, there's really no room, even for free will for that matter. But definitely no room for real evil. Like the example with the father hiding from the child in order to elicit the child's ingenuity to find the father. That's a positive. Where does the negative come? Because he hid himself, and he hid himself well, so there can be a unika from this. Something can come out of it, a derivative that wasn't intended. And what is that derivative? That the son stops looking and stops seeking. And the concealment develops its own, becomes a monster of its own. It develops its own identity. Just to drive the point home. I remember when I was writing Toward a Meaningful Life, I came to the last chapter, was called, it's called redemption and Messiah. Messiah, Mashiach and redemption. Messiah and redemption. And I remember being that this is the last chapter, I knew it had to have a certain, what's the word, a punch more than just the rest of the chapters being the last chapter. Okay, 1 second. 1 second. And it wasn't coming to me. As I was writing, I didn't feel I had that oomph. So I decided I think it was like 11 o'clock at night. I said, you know what, let me go down. I had a deadline. I had to be, I was on a tight deadline. So I go home, I'll lie down a few minutes. Usually you say a few minutes ends up being a few hours. And I'll just pause for a few minutes and let myself revisit it with fresh eyes and so on. And then around 2 a.m., if I recall correctly, I jumped out of bed and I think I had it. I had an epiphany. I remember I ran to my computer. Was it a computer at the time? Yeah. Yes, well, yeah, of course it was a computer, yeah. And I recalled a mashal that Chassidus brings that I thought would work excellent and perfect for this. And it's a mashal from the Mittler Rebbe. But I think it'd be very helpful in understanding what we're learning here. And I used it right at the beginning of the chapter on Messiah and redemption, or just redemption. I don't remember what's the name of the chapter. I think it's just redemption. I used the example. I paraphrased it. I changed it a bit just to fit, but the gist of it is that it's an example of a family who could not pay their bills. So the landowner put them in a prison. It wasn't a regular prison. He put them underground in a deep cave. And that was their life. That was their prison for the rest of their lives. Now, to sustain them, they would send down a basket of food into these caves 3 times a day. Now, of course, the family who had experienced living on land, above on the ground, in the light, they knew they were in prison. But as the generations grew, and that's the analogy, the generations developed there and grew, slowly they forgot that that this is a prison. They began thinking this is their natural reality. And the light on top, with the hole where the food would come from, they saw as being, like the sun. They didn't realize that it's really the real reality is up there and they're living. This became reality for them. As generations passed, the grandchildren and great-grandchildren start saying, who says there's another reality altogether? Maybe all there is this cave, this darkness. Basically, the point being that if you get accustomed to a certain circumstance, even if it's a total prison, a total hell, you can convince yourself this is reality. So the very idea of Geula, my point was, is a whole paradigm shift of how to look at your life. You can convince that this world that we live in right now is great. I'm making money, I'm successful, etc., etc. But when you learn about higher realities, you suddenly realize the point I want to make in regard to what we're discussing is that a tzimtzum that came only in order for us to be independent and find God in the cave, in the darkness. Once we become accustomed to it and we convince ourselves this is reality, and there's no such thing as pre-tzimtzum, or at least it's a complete novelty, something beyond, elikus b'schachus. It's something I don't relate to. That can lead to the worst of the worst. Because if you take that to its logical conclusion, what does it lead to? Dog eats dog, survival of the fittest. I'm here to take care of myself. I don't need to help you. It can lead to every possible destructive force of every injustice, every crime, every war, every genocide. All originating from a Helam that was a Helam of Kedusha, as we're going to learn more about. I just wanted to put it into context here. So now, once we are in this reality, where there is already now, develops, and that's what Ishtalshalos does. In the world of Ak and Akudim, and even the world of the Kudim, where there's the shattering of the containers, it's still all in Kedusha. But ultimately, it's going to evolve to a point where you're going to have, like I said, zelu umaze osalakim. There's going to be, just like there's a kedusha dika track, there's going to be a sitra achra, klippus. Now the truth is, klippus, all it means is a husk and a shell for the fruit within. But that's when you understand its context, like the Helam. If you understood that the concealment was only there to bring greater revelation, no problem. But what happens if the concealment becomes an end in itself? That's what klippus are. And that's why it's called Eilam HaKlippus V'Sitra Achra. It originates from a husk. All it is a banana peel, a potato peel, an eggshell. But what happens? You start worshiping the eggshell more than the egg, or the banana, or the peel more than the fruit within it. Then you have yourself a big distortion. Basically, when we start worshiping the physical world and forget its spiritual fruit within, that's what happens. Now, initially, you could say, what damage is done? So, okay, there's a little distortion. We're blinded. But take that to the logical conclusion. It leads to utter selfishness, materialistic indulgence, hedonism, and every other crime ultimately. I'm not saying it has to lead to that, but it could lead to that. And unfortunately, it has for different people, different situations. All as a result of a distortion of the Helam. So therefore, in Hishtalshelus, we have the concept also of negative energy. There is a concept of negative energy. Not Atzilus. Atzilus lo yigur chara. There's no evil in Atzilus. In Bria is the beginning of the glimmer of a yesh. So you still can't say there's evil, but you're beginning to have something that has separated itself from the source. And as it evolves to Yetzirah and Asiya, and then even lower, you start having the real forces that we will call, what he calls now, shluchei din. Gevuros kashas, like the Satan. So even though, like I explained, the Satan L'Shem Shemayim, the Satan was appointed by God to do a job. But the result of the job can be horrible. The Satan can cause a person the worst damage. Look at Eve, what happened? Lost his family, the tragedies of life. Now you'll say the Satan will be, maybe he's crying inside that he had to perpetrate it, but it had to be perpetrated. So yes, you can always find somewhere deep in the source the justification. But at the end of the day, it's a Holocaust. And a Holocaust is Gevuros kashas, and that's that. There's no ifs or buts. It's not something that is what we call divine revelation. It manifests itself in harsh severities, in harsh judgments. So he says, that's what he says now. So just like below, there are those that are teva ra. Same thing, Lamaila, he says, the shluchei hadin, the ambassadors of judgment, the klippus nega, these are the negative or the cruel angels, you can say, of klippus nega, shekol iker chayusam, their entire primary sustenance, like with that evil person, who's shenishluchu lahazik la'adam b'bon chayim ezeinu rachmana litzlan. And this is regardless of what they may be doing something against their own will. I understand the human being that's cruel, he's not doing it against his will. He's choosing it's who he is. With Malachim, you could say there may be deeper intentions. He doesn't say that here. It only says it on the Satan. But even if you say that, that still doesn't mean that they're not being destructive, because they're causing destruction. Someone is bringing destruction in Bana Chaim Zayna, which is children, life, and the parnosa and livelihood, God forbid. The Hainu al derech hanal, the teva bnei adam roim begashmis, which means, like similar to what we said before about those cruel people who are physically cruel people. Kach beruchnis malachim roim. Same thing with malachim roim. I looked up shevet anoshim v'negoy bnei adam. These are verses in the Torah that are brought in Biur Azer in different places that all indicate on these negative forces. Shapoilim kol ra
Klippus
v'hazik.
noiga. Why is it noiga? Klippus noiga.
But Pasha is because it is no source clips atmeis would only be but Pasha is because what I just said, like the klippa, that there is a fruit inside of it. It's just that we're only seeing the negative side. That's Bapashas. I don't remember if he explained. I think he just uses that expression. I think that's the reason.
Maybe there's
I don't
no
think-
self.
I don't think that there are
self-
a malachim of Shal's klippas atmeis. I think there's only malachim and klippas nega.
Okay.
Shapoilim kol ra lahazik la'adam. And it could also be the reason of Satan Shem Shemayim Niskav. Maybe that's the reason. I know in Panemius there is a kavanah, but at Bechatzenius it's anyway. Shit, their whole thing the Korah to the lahazik la'adam, but einish din kosher Rahman al-Islam. With a severe judgment, a punishing severe judgment, the punishment of severe judgment. And this is a sul al again from the Zohar. This is like a whip, a punishing whip. And the parentheses he just added, the cause of this is our evil actions. He's qualifying with that they don't just come and whip. It's coming as a result of actions. But still, the result is one that is Gevuros kashus, harsh judgments. And then he continues. I'm going to read here inside till the end of the paragraph now. Within this itself, there are thousands and tens of thousands of levels. And v'sharshem haklali, and their general root, or the all-encompassing root, I should say, better word than general. The all-encompassing root, hu hasatan hamakatrig, is the satan, the satan that is the complainer, the prosecuting Satan. Kamaimer, and this is the Gemara in Sukkah, I believe. This is a maimer where he says, "Ela umastin v'yered umakatrig." Like I mentioned on Friday, he goes up above and taxifies mastin, and then he comes down and mekatrig and prosecutes or files a complaint. Yeah, good.
What's mastin?
I think mastin means he instigates. I think. I looked it up. I'm trying to remember the Gemara. 1 second. Give me 1 minute. If anybody wants to look up. Say can you look up online if you see the Gemara? 1 second. Hold on. Give me a second. Come on, I'll find it now. 7. I said Sukkah. No, Sukkah is the other one, not Sukkah. Sorry. Baba Basra Tazayin Aleph. Can you look up Baba Basra Tazayin Aleph? Anybody? Can you look it up?
What's the page?
16a. Baba Basra 16a. Did you find anything?
Yes, I'm just reading. Do you know where it is in 16a? He's reading about
Not exactly. You know what? Okay, it's fine. It's more or less what I just said. If you find it, great. If not, I'm just going to continue reading it. This is his entire sustenance, his life. It's his job.
It means to bring harm.
It says harm?
Amar Rabbi Yochanan ilmalei mikra kasiv efshar la'amra ke'adam shemasitinin oisa v'nisa. So it says the verse says you moved me against him, like a person whom others persuaded and allows himself to be persuaded, as if God had not wanted to do anything, but allowed himself to be persuaded to bring harm to Job. Mastinim oiso v'nisa. I'll keep looking.
Okay, fine. I'm going to look it up again. And without this activity of causing this prosecution, he's like an aluka, like a leech. He has no life, like an aluka, shemesheches hasadam, like a leech that draws blood, sustained on blood. And he's now he's saying these two steps. That's like the ishra b'tivui, the person who's evil by nature. He hates his other because he did something evil. And because his whole drive, his whole being is to cause him evil, that's why he finds. Why does he find every guilt, everything negative about him, every fault to prosecute him in order to punish him? Because of this rad that he has to him. So he's saying the two things. Because he has this attitude, that's why he finds all these different things. And then he comes and he actually prosecutes to bring down this evil in actuality, not just theory. And then he goes back to the third approach. Remember the third most subtle? He says, what's the hadak mirazeh? The dak, what is more subtle than this level of evil? Is not Rabbi Poil, but Rabbi Koyach. What is that? Remember, he said the third is that his mind and his heart are inclined to guilt, are inclined to judgment. So he says this, hu gevuros v'dinim kashim elyonim yesed. These are higher level harsh judgments. What means higher? He means subtler. That's what he means. It's not as blatant as the lower ones where you're actually either torturing or, it looks like to me that he's comparing the Satan to level 2 mostly, not to level 1. Level 1, the one who just tortures the family and loved ones, he doesn't seem to bring that in the Malachim. I don't see that example in the Malachim. That even though, let me just see again. Maybe I'm wrong. No, I may be wrong. I think that may be the first level. Because he says, B'teva b'nei Adam roim b'gashmis. The shluchei hadin, the malachim roim of Klippus Nega look like level 1. Because what they do, their whole thing is to cause damage to people. He says that's like B'teva b'nei Adam roim b'gashmis. The root of that is the Satan, who's Eila. And he is actually finding, that's like step 2, that's like the second type. He's finding fault, and he's the one that's lining up to punish someone who did something wrong. That's the level 2, and he says, and higher than that is one whose inclination is to look always with the negative, and that's dinim kashim al yenim yesed umestayif mezeh, and from that is a derivative from that, an extension, or mestayif, an extension. From that is enosan eino b'migdash v'yichrivoy. That's the Gemara in Sukkah, that he actually looked and gazed at the Migdash and caused and v'yichrivoy. So even though that, of course, God gave permission, but it was then Satan who found the faults in the people, and he looked at the Migdash and caused it to be destroyed. Why? The fisheyotzar loy, from the word yetzar, because the machtem eing. He was what's the word eng? He was hurt.
Yeah.
Yeah, how do you translate in English? Eng, how do you say eng? He's tortured by the couldn't stand. He couldn't tolerate the good, that there should be good by Jews.
Anguish might be good.
Okay, yeah. He agonized. Tsar means really, like mina meitzar, means that he's like distressed. That's the word. He's distressed by the good of the Jews. Matev shel Yisrael. So it starts from the subtler one, and then it evolves. This is the key thing. And here's how we see how these harsh judgments evolve from a higher, more subtle level to a harsher level. Mepnimius lechitzenius, from a more pneumistic place, meaning pneumius here more internal, to a more blatant external. B'revavis madregas, tens of thousands of levels, at shaba einish b'pol mamish, till the actual punishment comes and is actualized. V'kula mepchinas, and all of them originate from the level Yud Aleph, the 11th level of the Keser, the Klippa Shenikra Reisha the Esav. They all come from Keser of Klippa. Remember, there's Keser of Kedusha, there's Keser of Klippa, there's always Zelu Mazeh, parallel worlds. The 11th, which is called the head of Esav, which remember is rooted in in the bosom of Yitzchak, and we're going to learn soon what that means. Because he didn't get yet to Gevuros Kedusha here. He's not talking about Kedusha. In Gevuros Kashes, he explained levels and how they evolve all the way rooted from Esav. So it's interesting. The Satan is the Sherish Kalali of all these evil ones. And Esav is the root of it all, back all the way in the Kesser of Klippa. Okay.
Is it possible that Mastin means to get?
What?
Is it possible that Mastin means to turn God against a mensch?
Mastin, I said before, was incite. I think that's the translation of the word, to instigate.
Yeah. That works.
Yeah, but I'll look it up. It's something that, let's put it this way, it's nothing positive. That's for sure.
Esav is Keser the Klippa, right? Esav is symbolizing the Satan.
Though the Satan, he didn't say Satan is Keser of Klippa. Esav is higher than Satan. Esav is the root of it all. The Satan is already on lower levels. It's all rooted Keser Klippa Shenikra Reisha the Esav ba'atvid Yitzchak. Let me just say this. I hope none of you have ever dealt with sadists, real sadism, and real cruelty. I have also for many years didn't, and then when I unfortunately had to deal with it, not because I wanted to, but because of the work I do, and I discovered things that are very, very, if you don't have a lot of faith in goodness, you can really become very depressed from it all. Like the Rebbe once told Beryl Unick, that thank God that God helped that God helped me train myself to see at everything with a positive eye, because if not, well, I couldn't survive. That's what the Rebbe once said. In other words, there's a lot of darkness around, and hopefully we all are not exposed to it, especially when you see it in with your own eyes. But one of the things in studying sadism, if you could call it that, it never begins in the most blatant way. Like if you find serial murderers and study their childhood, they're not necessarily murdering anyone, but you'll see signs of cruelty. Like if you see a sign of a child that enjoys dissecting an animal. I mean, I don't mean to be graphic, and I hope everybody is over 18 here. So I'm not going to be very explicit, but I'm talking about painful things. But you see certain behavior. Like some people, you can't hurt a fly. There are people who can't literally, will not, but then there are people who don't have an issue with being a little cruel, even to a little creature. Now, I'm not saying everyone who does that is going to become a serial murderer, obviously. And everyone who does something cruel it's always going to blow into. But when you look back, you do see these signs, which means that Gevuros Kashes, these harsh judgments or these harsh cruelty, doesn't always begin overnight. It can begin at very small levels. Now, the question is whether a person is born this way or do they become this way? It's a big question. Nobody has a full answer on it anyway, really. Very many people argue that it's usually due to a lot of trauma, where a person was treated with sadism, so it becomes one of their modus operandi. But I don't want to get into that so much, because he's not really, even though here he does say Teva B'nei Adam, which sounds natural, but you could also say the Rebbe Rashab or the Alter Rebbe and Bir Yazer are not really getting into whether it's nurture could also create nature. Teva Sheni. It's not really a psychological analysis of the pathology of these people. It's more just stating that the person is that way right now. And, so it'd be interesting to know what the Rabbeim thought of there can be any intervention. Can these people be helped? Can a person like this that tortures family members or other levels that he described here, can there be an intervention? I can't imagine that with Torah and Chassidus, there isn't something to be said about it. But right now, he's not going into that. I just wanted to make the point that the understanding of the evolution of something from a very subtle form to a more grotesque form of it is basic understanding of human psychology today. Sometimes it even goes the other way, that where parents don't discipline properly, then suddenly something that was just a small thing becomes a big thing. Now, again, I'm not a big disciplinarian advocate, because it could also have the other extreme, like we spoke about. Gevura, discipline could also cause problems too. But the point I'm making here is, let's say if you let your child take something from their friend without permission, and then you find out 10 years later, the child has permitted themselves now to just in general, it's easy for them to just steal things. Now, I'm not saying it all started from that, but you have to ask yourself, if you didn't nip it in the bud, the child then feels they have a license, and then it becomes, something you do. I recently had someone came to me, he's a kleptomaniac. He says, I can't control myself. I go to a store, I buy things, but I always stick in one or two things if I can. And he was very embarrassed to say it, but he says, I can't stop myself. And I said, and it's not because he's poor and he finds some teres that the guy's overcharging. He just does it. That's it. Now, I asked him some questions. I asked him, did you ever see it in your life? He says, yeah, my father did it. I used to go with him, and I didn't notice in the beginning, but then I saw. So by him, it's acceptable because his father did it. So you ask yourself, I'm just pointing out some scenarios. I'm trying to apply this to situations that. Now, obviously, the point of all of this is not to leave us depressed. The point is going to be transformation of these Gevuros, like he spoke, Havaya Yechatu. We want the Yechatu part, the elimination, the transformation of these negative stuff. But as I said at the beginning of the class, this is a Biyuri Hazayar, which I wasn't shocked to find. I knew that in the early Maimorim, you have ideas like this. It's just that Rebbe Rashab does elaborate more, and I have to tell you that in Tafresh Peites of the Frierdiker Rebbe, which is based on this, he elaborates even more. And not only that, Tafresh Peites was later reprinted in Tafshin Vav, I mentioned. The Maimers Haifayi Chatem Merivav, the same ideas. And Frierdiker Rebbe, actually the Maimer that he said at the wedding of the Rebbe, same year, Tafresh Peites. What I'm looking at here is a Rosh Hashanah Maimer, I think, or Shabbos Shuvah. What is this Maimer? Yeah, Rosh Hashanah. But later the year, the Rebbe said a Maimer, Asher Bara, I think Asher Bara, Sasam Simcha could be. Just a second, let me see something. Yeah, Asher Bara. In the Frierdiker Rebbe brings similar idea of the description of these type of people. I always wondered why the Frierdiker Rebbe of all time said it at the wedding of the Rebbe. That's another discussion. So there's more elaboration if you want a little more graphic detail of cruelty. We can learn it. You can look in Tafresh Peites. It's a Sefer Amarim Tafresh Peites, chapter 19. Actually, no, not chapter 9, chapter 20. Yeah, chapter 20 and 21. Interested. I don't know if we need to learn it because it doesn't really. I looked at it. I don't know if it adds an understanding. It's just more elaborate. Okay. So now that we've covered this, first of all, any questions? And then
I think that the difference between Malachim and human being, that Malachim, even though that they are Shluchei Adin, they are not evil. They are like robots, that this is what they have to do. It's not a good thing. But human beings that he described that are doing that, they have a bchira. But them it's probably shalosh klipas atmeis, not only klipas noiga.
That's right. Don't blame some
You could say
for
that.
problems.
You could say that. That's most likely why he's saying klipas nega. But I want to look it up. There's a letter from the Rebbe somewhere about where it says somewhere Malachim get punished for certain behavior. And he asks, how's that possible? I want to look up that piece. It
Talking about
this.
Malach Matat, I don't remember exactly what he did. He did, I think,
Yeah.
a good thing, but he was not allowed to do it.
But what it says, afkuhi,
Afkuhu, and they gave him 60 malchus.
right. So the question
I
is
think
what
this
that
is
means.
a different thing. Yeah.
No, I'm not saying it's this, but it touches upon. Yeah, but I want to look it up. Yeah. No, listen. Obviously, a malach doesn't have bchira, but still, that doesn't mean a malach can't be a cause for destruction, and that's that. Okay. Any other questions? Any other comments? Questions? Is it? We continue on, or anybody wants to say anything? Okay.
I'm just wondering how that Simpson's concealment devolves. Concealment is, the child is looking for the father. All of a sudden, it devolves into not just concealment, but a tendency to look at the bad in something, the negative.
It's not suddenly. You're talking about thousands and thousands of levels of concealment till you get to that point. It's not suddenly. You're talking here a shtalshlus that goes through a lot of levels. I was just explaining that it all starts. If you didn't have the first helam, you wouldn't have anything, because it wouldn't be possible even. But look, once Adam and Chava ate from the tree of knowledge with all their good intentions, you really have started a cycle that was just a matter of time. Anybody that understands that once you defy God, even in the most subtle way, ultimately, it's possible to defy God in the most harsh way. So the point is that as soon as God created another entity, like in Yom Sheni, doesn't say ki tov. Why not? It's God's creation. There's no evil. Why does it say ki tov? Good. On day 2 of creation. So it says because nivra machlekas, but there was no machlekas. Nobody was around to argue. But as soon as God created havdalah, separation between higher and lower, right there is the potential for argument and ultimately war and ultimately the Holocaust. Ultimately. So you can't say ki tov because the seed has been planted. So you don't have to, everybody knows that if a person has a small little scratch on their finger, it doesn't seem like much. But if you don't deal with it, it could, I didn't say it will, it could lead to the worst nightmare. So the understanding of this makes sense. Like I gave the example with the pit, with the cave. So I don't think you're going to find a human being that today says, oh, God concealed from me, and tomorrow they're a sadist and murdering people. I don't think it works exactly like that. He actually, in the Bir Azer, he talks about this as well. He asks the Gemara that says that a person born in Mazel Madim will either be a sheikhet or a moil, or a, what do you bring the other options there? But sheikhet a moil, someone who will shed blood. And he says, why doesn't he right away bring a ritzeach? What about a murderer? So he says, because it doesn't always lead to that. It could be something much more subtle. I have to look it up. I remember he said something about that. Okay?
It was very interesting. You're saying that it all really devolves from a lack of unity, that separation in Yom Beis. That's the ultimate source, right? That's the ultimate source of this. That's why Achdus is the ultimate tikkun on this.
Oh yeah, you read a Cholzu Ranat, he says it explicitly. Yeah, absolutely. When two people show kindness and love to each other, they are challenging, and that's the antidote that ripples through all of Ishtalshlus, that heals the rift, that starts with the Tzimtzum Arishim.
There is Beetle.
Al
If
Ken
you-
Yemru. What?
But you said because there is bitul, and the opposite, it's ego. So it's only about myself.
There's a mimer, I think Al Ken Yemru HaMoishlim Tzadik Aleph from the Rebbe, the Frierdiker Rebbe. It's a very famous mimer. I think it's Al Ken Yemru. Anyway, mimer, the Rebbe brought it also in the mimer Echa and the Baslagani Lamed Aleph. Yeah, Kaponim. There he says the following, which is from Chassidus, that the tzimtzum, the root of the Chet Tzadas is rooted in the diminishment of the moon, day 4, which is rooted in the Shviras HaKelim, the shattering of the containers of Toyu, which is rooted in the Tzimtzum HaRishon. So I've given a bunch of workshops on this to explain how psychologically things don't break overnight. If you see a problem today, it was rooted somewhere. And it's rooted in subtle levels. The Kitrug, the moon complaining, the moon to be the is actually das, and in turn is rooted in the shattering of the containers, which is rooted in the Tzimtzum HaRish, and there are many other levels in between. Can you guys hear me?
You're choppy.
About this. I would continue on now. Sorry?
He said you were choppy, which you
You're
were.
choppy.
Is it better now?
Yes, seems to be.
Okay. There's a lot more to be said about it. I think let's just
choppy.
read the next few lines. I'll go a little, I don't know what to tell you. I don't know what to do. Let's continue on and see if it goes well. So now he goes back and says, okay, you explained to me how harsh severities and judgments evolve from one to the next. And now we need to understand what's the relationship? What's the connection between the Sereisha de Esav, which we call Keser of Klippa, to the Gvura of Gedusha of Yitzchak? I understand that in Klippa itself, it can get worse and worse, but how do you jump from holy to the non-holy? Now, I should have added one thing before we continue. The Keser of Klippa is called the level Yud Aleph. I mentioned on Friday, but I wanted to elaborate. Kedusha is always 10. Everything is number 10. In Klippa, Chassidus says there's an 11th because it doesn't enter B'Primius and just hovers above, which is why it allows for the Klippa to emerge. So 11, even though we know about Yud Aleph Nissen that 11 could also be higher than Ishtalshelus, but 11 also indicates, on some situations, a level that's outside of Ishtalshelus, but in the negative way. And that's the level of Keser, because Keser then is not included in the 10 spheres. So Keser of Klippa is like above and is outside of, and that's the 11. But now, I just wanted to add that. So now, what's the connection? What's the shaykhis of the head of Esav that you just get is the root? Everything is coming from there, all these negative, these harsh judgments, to the Gedusha, the Gevura of Gedusha of Yitzchak. V'hinei, and now, yesh lahagdim lazeh, we need to preface, to explain this, we need to preface, Inyan Gevuros Memutakis. The idea he's going to introduce now, even though I mentioned before, the idea of sweetened judgments. Shein Hepach Gevuros Koshes. They're the ultra opposite. They are the diametric opposite of the harsh judgments which we just learned. Gevuros Memutakis. So remember, there's a thing called chesed, that's open and revealed kindness. There's a thing called judgments, din, And it could be regular gvura, it could be gvuras kashis, harsh judgments, and it could be gvuras memutokis, sweetened judgments, which is what happens on Rosh Hashanah. We sweeten the judgments. Like he said at the top of page, the end of the paragraph, page 1288. So he says to understand how from Esav, how from Yitzchak came Esav, and the connection between them, we need to understand what is this gvuras memutokis. And these are called, he says, nikroim v'nikrois, or nikroim, gvuras shebechesed. He's giving it a name. Gevuros memutokis is gvuras within chesed. Not just gvura within chesed, that's why they're sweetened. B'yeis shanuroyim, and now to explain it, he says b'yeis, because when we see b'isha tev b'tivai, a person who's fundamentally a good person, behepech mamish, we see mamish the opposite of what we see when what we learned before about an evil person. Shekol chayusei atzmi, just like the evil person, his whole life source is like a leech feeding off the blood of others. The good person, kol chayusei atzmi, his core fundamental life and sustenance and vitality, hurak leheti v'lei lehara klal. It's only to do good and never to do bad to anyone, or at all, to do bad at all. But now he's going to explain that in this itself, there's also personality types. But omnom, however, imu ishkar b'tivoi, if he's a person who's naturally cold and aloof, and type of person, kar b'tivoi, yichla koyach tuvai v'chazdei miyad. Even if he's a naturally good person, because he's a aloof type of person, a more cool and collected, a cold person, not a passionately warm person. So even though his chayas comes from doing good, but because of his coolness, this power of good and kindness will quickly dissipate or immediately dissipate. The Lashon Yiddish, a kalter mensch, kalte blut. Oh boy. Okay, that's nice. So a kalte mensch means a cold person, and kalte blut means cold blood. You know, you ever see someone says you have like ice. The guy has blood of ice. His blood is icy. What's the expression? Chilled blood. But there's a word for it. Person who's blood like ice. A kalte blut. Even though, of course, blood we know is warm, but still, there are personality types that have kalte blut, a kalt blutigkeit is an expression. He's like a cold-blooded individual. It's an expression of a personality type. And then there are warm-blooded individuals. Now, of course, it doesn't mean physically, because as I said, all blood is warm, but personality type. So he's using that expression, a kalte mensch, kalte blut.
Ice in his veins. He has ice in his veins. Is the expression.
There you go. Okay, yeah. Yeah, Ayin Beis is getting very psychological. The kol shehu ish hachesed b'tagburas gdela, and the more a person is a kind person with more intensity, the more intense his kindness is. Whoever is the kind person, a more intense kind person, that's due to the fact that he's a warm person with a boiling blood. His blood is bubbling and boiling in all matters. He's passionate in all matters. And here again he says Yiddish, Beloshen Yiddish, Ba'ein Heser Mensch, Zudike Blut. A Heser Mensch means he's a hot person, a hot-blooded person. Zudike Blut means boiling blood. His blood is zudik. Zudike blut. Wow. Okay. Hine oz. Now this type of person, now him, then, gamba enik shalei b'shefa chazde v'tuve, that also in his pleasure, in that flow of kindness and goodness that flows from him, It manifests this kindness and goodness in a fiery flame with very intense warmth. So in other words, you could be warm, you could be kind and good to someone in different ways. It could be a kind person, but in a very cool manner. It could be a very warm and passionate, like he says, chimimus b'yeser. Al-kain, and therefore Yair.
You could be a kind person with a chayus atzmis, but you are a cold person.
Yeah. And therefore dissipates good. Al-kain Yair Eir chazde b'tagburas g'deila. And that's why the Eir, the light, the energy of his kindness is flowing, is radiating with b'tagburas g'deila, which means a very intense. It's gvura. It's to gvuras g'deila. Bli hefsek klal, without any pause or cessation, without ceasing at all. V'lo yichla keiche le'elam, and his power, his kindness, and his keiche never dissipates. V'lo yanuach v'yishkeit, and he will not rest and be quiet. Ad sheyases atei b'peil, until he does the goodness and kindness to the person in actuality, v'yamed l'chol menagid hashefa, and he will stand up to anyone who is trying to oppose this flow. That's the level of his kindness. In other words, a totally all-consumed, passionate, hot-blooded, driven kindness that he will not stop anything. It will not cease. It will not cool off. It will make sure. You see people like that. There are people. I think Eliezer, you could describe a friend of yours that way. You know, they're just passionate about helping another person and will do this without any hesitation, they're never unceasing, unyielding, relentless. It's a good word, relentless. Because he has in this tremendous energy, life, sustenance, passion, v'otzum. Keiche me'ed. V'yesh b'zeh chayis rav v'otzum keiche me'ed.
V'yesh b'zeh chayus v'koyach rav v'otzum.
Yeah, but then how do you read the next two words? You have to say it flows together. It goes both ways. He has tremendous power and energy, and his strength is very strong in this, committed. To the point that the kol ikar, that all primary kiyum hachesed, the fulfillment of this kindness, the sibus amadose v'tokfe, and the cause that he's standing so strong and unrelenting, one second.
You said it right. It's confusing, but you said it right. It's only
due to the Gevuros rish be'esh, to the Gevuros, to the intensity of the flaming fire. Hatshuka shaboy, the rish be'esh hatshuka by the flaming fire of his tshuka, of his desire. V'nikra, or nikra is Gevuros shebechesed. It's called Gevuros shebechesed. In other words, what he's saying here is that this very kind person, actually Gvura works for him the other way around. Because Gvura here means passionate, means intense. So till now we were learning about Gvura as judgments. And now he's speaking about Gvuras Mamutok. He's talking about, he's taken the Gvura and turned it the opposite direction. The intensity of Gvura is not intense in hurting someone, it's intense in loving someone. Yeah. So now that's what he's saying here. If he's cool, so he'll have chesed, but he's not going to have this intensity of chesed. But now that he has the zudike blut is gvuradik. What means gvura? Not gvura as in discipline or judgment, as an intensity. It's warm, passionate. Because remember, eish, Fire is gvura. Chesed is water. Chesed is cool. Gvura is warm and passionate. But it could be a passion, like you spoke before, gvura is kosher. So now he's talking, and this is called gvura shebechesed. And like we see, also in the energy of the love in the heart. That is the oyer, the inner oyer, and the oyer and the inner dimension of chesed. Remember, chesed connects to ava, gvura to yira. But the premise of chesed is ava, love. The premise of yira, of gvura, is yira. So he says, K'mosha Gam be'er ava shebelev imhi b'kriros kamayim. If that love is like, there's ava kamayim. If the love is like cold, like water, shenimshach, water is nimshach, means it extends, water flows from the top down. Tichla eire b'ma'at zman. The energy of it will dissipate in a short while. In a short while. Ki yiskar alev b'ma'at ma'at, because the heart gets cooler slowly, ad sheyavut legamri, until this love completely disappears. And now he qualifies in the parentheses. Zocher av nimshach acharecha kamayim. Remember, that he's talking about Avraham Avinu. Remember our father, who was drawn to you with love like Mayim, which seems to be, you just said Mayim is weakens it. So he says, no, Shazel Avad Avram Oyavi, which that is referring to the love of Avram, my beloved. Hainu b'chinas Ava b'tainugim. That's a unique level. That's Ava that comes with deep pleasures. She'Ava pnimi she'en lahefsek klal kaneda. In Mayim itself, there's another level called Ava b'tainugim, a very high level that is very deep. It's not passionate like fire, but it's very deep and internal, and that does not cease at all, Kaneda. So he's just qualifying. In Ava Kamayim, there's another level called Ava B'Tainugim, that's Avram. Ava Kasher Klula Merish Be'esh. But with the level of love of water that we're talking about here, when by contrast, when the love is encompasses the burning flame, his slavus Klula Merish Be'esh is slavus Ava. That it's like the flaming fire of a fiery and a torched love, a love like a torch. Hanikra bezeir, shalhuva derichimusa. In the Zeir, it calls it the torch of love. Richimusa is love. Richimu. Kameshikos of rishpe eish. Its flames are like fiery flames. Huh?
Reshofeho.
The shafeh be'emes? Because I heard the Rebbe once say rishpe eish. Rishpe rishafeho. Okay, rishafeho rishpe eish. And how do you translate rishafeho?
Reshofeho are the fiery sparks.
So the fiery sparks are flaming like rishpe eish, like fiery flames. Yesh b'zeh chayis rav v'koyach otzum. Yeah, like here again, koyach otzum. It has in it a tremendous energy, vitality, and powerful strength. B'li yufsak eira ava le'elam. The way that the love will never cease at all. The love will never cease. U'kameshe kosav ki oza kamus ava.
Ki azo moves. I'm sorry.
How do you pronounce it?
Azo kamoves ahavo. The avo is azo like
is
death.
As strong as death. Meaning that it's very intense, it's never ending. Okay. Umayim rabim la yuchla lichvis es ha'ava, and great waters cannot extinguish this love. Ukamay kain, so just like it is in Ava Shebelev, which is the root of Chesed. Now he's going back. Ukamay kain ubchinas ha'Chesed, ha'ikar ubchinas ha'Gevuros sheba. The primary thing that really drives it is the intensity within it, the fire is within it. And that's why the primary flow, the all primary flow, comes from the level of Gvura. That's why the Shulchan, which is the Ashpa of Chsadim, the Shulchan in the Mishkan and the Beis Hamikdash, where did it stand? B'tzafin, because Tzafin is connected to Gvura. And a person who wants Hashirus, which is wealth, in other words, if you want a big flow of Chesed, Yatzpin means to wait. But it refers to the level of Gvura, the intensity that you need to draw this level of Shefa. And even though it says that God sustains the world b'chesed, with kindness, the world was built with chesed, but this is the level of Gvura shebechesed. That's why we say Ata Gibber, Al-Kei Mechalkel Chaim Bechesed, and that's why Mechalkel Chaim Bechesed, Ata Gibber, we say in Shemona Esrei, and that's why Mechalkel Chaim Bechesed, because you're intense. And do it through your Gvura comes the abundant and never-ending and unceasing flow of Chesed. Because the primary thing of Gvura is in the intensity of kindness. Interesting touch. Your kindness overpowered us. But he's touching here, it's coming kigovar, with that intensity of Gvura. And this is what is called sweetened Gevuros, because now the Gevuros have been transformed into a tremendous force of kindness. So you have kindness and Gvura together. Gevuros memutakis. The diametric opposite of Gevuros koshes, of harsh judgments that we learned before. So it's good to know that Rebbe Rashab gave equal time to a description of a beautiful personality, because till now we were learning about the other type. So now we have a good, nice contrast here.
There is the Rebbe's Maimer about Yitzchok that he is explaining that even though Yitzchok is Gvur, but that's Tigboires Sachasodim. Like he's saying here, that there is Chesed and then there is
the Rebbe's Maimer is taken from these Maimorim, by the way.
This is Tigboires Sachasodim. That the Chesed is...
The Rebbe's Maimorim are taken from these Maimorim. If you look there, you'll see the sources are going to cite the different places that are cited here. Yeah.
How would you say in one word what Tigboires means? In one
intensity.
word.
Intensity. I've been saying it several times. Intensity. Intensification.
Wow, what a section. What was that? How'd you type, Rabbi? Lahashir Yatzpin. Lahashir Yatzpin.
Yatzpin can mean a few things. Like by the Seder we say Tzofim is to hide. Yatzpin can mean also to wait. I think there, Aretz Lahashir Yatzpin, I have to look it up if I recall correctly.
Yatzpin will go north.
Yeah, Yatzpin is to go north. That's north is always a place of Gvura, is north. The Hashi Yatzpin means to go north to find wealth. That's what he means there. Not sure. I'm going to look it up. I'll look it up. I'll tell you tomorrow.
Where's that from? Is that from Gemara? That
Gemara. Yeah.
And which Gemara? I'll look it up also there. See what art scroll teaches it.
Let me see.
Did you say south?
It's in
Those who had wealth before a minute ago, or
north, not south. Tzofim is north.
He brings down a Gemara in the Rabasa, the Chofei Ayin Beis.
Yeah. He brings also the pasuk Oirech Yomim Bimino Bismoilo Oisher v'Chavod.
Where are you looking? Who brings?
It's I don't know. It's a portal from Adaf Hayemi. He brings the sources there.
Yeah, but And
The
Naftali, did
is
you say?
yes.
The Gemara in Bavas is Aroitz La'achkin Yadrin, V'Sheyashir Yatztin.
V'simoncha shulchan b'tzofim.
Yeah.
Baba
Not
Basra
Tyler.
Chaf Hey Beis.
Baba Basra, what was it?
25b.
25B, thank you.
He brings two biurim. One biur, if you want to be a chacham, you should go to Chachmei Dorim. And one, you should, when you're davening, you should face keneged Ilashir, you should face keneged Mizrachis Tzfoinis.
Okay. Wow. Okay. Good.
What does
He
that
brings
mean?
the
So,
cli-
what
the
is,
cli-
wait,
the
wait.
cli-
Which way do you face, Shlomo?
Excuse me?
Say in English what you just said.
He brings two explanation. It's not everything about it. If you want to become smart, you should go to the chachamim that are in Dorim. And if another pirush, if you want to become rich, when you're davening, you should face to south, north.
To the north.
Mizrachi, you have to daven to the east. You have to daven to the east, but east north.
Aha, that's it. Okay. Interesting.
Northeast slightly. I got you.
It brings the Kli Yakor also that Avraham Avinu was going to the south. So he's saying maybe since Avraham Avinu wanted to have godliness, so he went to the south. But Avraham Avinu did not ask for wealth because we know that Avraham Avinu told even to the king of Elam that he's not going to take from him anything. So he did not ask for wealth. It brings also the greatest Chachamim, the war in the south, from Maseches Tamid.
Okay, very good.
It brings the Seder Aderes that Rabbi Yeshua was called Rabbi Yeshua from the south. He was mentioned in Yerushalmi many times. Then he's discussing which Rabbi Yeshua is it.
So we'll stop here at the end of the paragraph on top of page 1290. I'm sorry, what did I do? I'm sorry. On top of page 12, sorry, not the top. We're stopping at the middle paragraph at the end of page 1289. And you still have to understand the connection to Yitzchak and Esav, but he's laying down the ground for how Gevuros have different ways of expression here. I mean, if you think about it, I'll just say one powerful message here, even though he didn't say it explicitly yet. If you see in a person that's very intense with Gevura, let's say very judgmental, like he described, hypothetically, they have the fire, except it's going in the wrong direction. It's going toward damaging and hurting other people. If you can turn that passion and fire toward love and kindness, then that would be the sweetening of that gvura. Whereas, let's say a person who's cool, he may be a kind person, but he's not as passionate. So yes, he doesn't have the power to go and hurt somebody, but he's also not going to love people with this type of passion. So it could be that there's already here so-called the beginning of the tikkun, or the healing of the harsh gevuros. I'm sure that's where he's going to be leading to, because he said, and then he's going to talk about transforming, not just eliminating harsh judgments, but transforming them. So just some thoughts as we move forward here. But it's interesting how the Rebbe Rashab did move from these highest levels before the Tzimtzum, and he bring it down, really driving the point home all the way down to human personality, nature, who we are. I think it's unbelievable, because you have here Tzimtzum playing itself out. And like I always say, you can't understand these concepts unless you personalize them. It's very hard to talk about the Tzimtzum and before the Tzimtzum if you don't have it within you. And here the Rebbe Rashab is literally giving us real archetypes of human beings. We find Gvura in us, and on both levels, on the obviously on the negative, and also most importantly on the positive side. So you really have Tzimtzum at work here, Tzimtzum and Gvura and all of that, and then we're going to talk about transforming it. I think that's fascinating. Yeah.
How do you distinguish this type of Gevuros Mamtakas, whatever the sweetened Gevuros, from the perversion of Chesed, which we've talked about previously, where it's Chesed gone awry, like someone who's promiscuous, lustful, just can't stop loving everything and everyone around him?
I want to reserve that for later because it's going to confuse matters here. It's not really,
because it also seems like an intensity of Chesed.
Yeah, but there remember, just as Gvura can go awry, so can Chesed. Just like you can have destruction by fire, you can have destruction by water, too much water, flood, right? So Chesed needs Gvura to temper it. Everything needs bittul. That I can tell you right now. Everything needs bittul to make it healthy. Chesed needs Gvura to temper it, and Gvura needs Chesed to temper it. And they both need each other. It's all a matter of finding the right balances. I mean, I don't want to go there right now because it's really not the discussion. He's not trying to compare Chesed to Gvura here. Here he's talking more. He's trying to discuss the whole idea of Havai Yechat and Meriva. So I would stay away from that right now until we get the bigger picture. Then we can go back and see how it works with different types of personalities.
I was going to ask after the class. I knew it was off topic, but it still raises the question. By the way, I posted in the WhatsApp thread excerpts from the Friedeker Rabbi's mimer that you mentioned on Hashem Yechat Merivav. If anyone's wondering why I put it there, it's because it elaborates on what we talked about today.
Yeah. If you find the Bir Azer, you can also post it.
I found it, but it's in Rashi text. I'm not so good at it, so I'm having a hard time finding Dafka where he says
there's a new edition of Bir Azer that's a regular type. It's not online yet, maybe. Maybe it's not online. Not
in Hebrew books, but I'll send it to you. Maybe you can tell me where I can find. I'm not good at reading Rashi text.
No, I understand, but I think I don't know if it's online. They did print a new edition recently. I don't have it either, or else I would just scan that. So it's 2 pages, not a long thing. Okay, I'll look it up.
And by the way, there's 2 separate mimers of the Mittler Rebbe that I found, Birei HaZohar for Parshas Bamidbar. So, anyways, it's weird.